cut some meat today, buddy.
Hey guys, welcome in today. Today we're gonna go over how to cut down a top sirloin. So we're gonna show you how to take this piece of meat from this into this. So to get started, one of the things that I see a lot of folks doing that you really shouldn't is trimming a little too much in the beginning. So we're just gonna take off some of the bigger pieces of fat here that just come right off. A lot of them will peel right out. And then take this guy off right here. Then we're gonna flip her over and we're gonna start working this seam out. So this should just pull apart for the most part. You may have to take your knife and just kind of go through here, loosen it up a little bit. And you just want to follow the seam all the way down. And you can see I had my hand in there just a second ago, just kind of separating it. And when you get down to the end, you'll notice this piece kind of looks like a giant triangle. So once you find the line where the meat stops and the fat begins here, you just basically just run your knife like this, hold this out of the way, and cut all the way down. So this will trim up here in a second. This is what a lot of you folks have probably heard of, being called picanha cap steaks. Some people use this for kebab meat. Historically, that's what a lot of people in the US use it for. But it is a really great cut to cook on the grill. So we'll go over that here in just a minute. We're gonna go ahead and get this guy trimmed up just a tad. Again, we're just taking off the visible fat that we can see. All of this, we're gonna leave most of it on unless we can pull it off. And again, a lot of this stuff, if it'll peel right off, go ahead and take it. But for the most part, you're not gonna do any trimming on the steaks until after we're done cutting. And so on a top sirloin, you've got two sides. You've got a flatter side where this cap will stay on. So you want to leave this on for more than one reason. You want to leave this on so you know where to start, but you also want to leave this on because if you go taking this off, 9 times out of 10, you're going to cut into the meat below. So on the opposite side of that little cap, you'll see we've got some gristle pieces here. Looks like another separate muscle here. Now you can take all of this off if you really want to, but if you're trying to get as little waste as you possibly can, you're gonna wanna just leave everything on and we'll show you how to trim the steaks up after they're cut out. So we're gonna go ahead and cut steaks out of this, and you can see if you're a stickler for cutting against the grain, which you should be, then you can see that the grain clearly runs this way. Now on the sirloin itself, you'll notice that the grain's a little bit off. So you wanna compensate for that when you're cutting it because this muscle here isn't what we really wanna eat. We wanna eat the big muscle down here. So we're just gonna check around and make sure that we've got our grain running the way we think it's running. We're gonna just kick it to the side just a little bit. Another little tip, and I picked this up, you'll probably hear me say this same thing 1,000 times. When you go to cut, first you want a sharp knife, and second you want to make sure that once your knife tip hits the block, it doesn't leave the block. As long as you keep the knife tip down, you can do this, you can do this, you can go all crazy with it if you want to, but it's not gonna slice into your meat several times. So it's not gonna look like, you know, like you're making feathers or a nice pretty dress. You're gonna actually be cutting a steak. So again, I'm going up and down all the way back, but I'm making sure that my knife tip stays on the block down there. Now this end piece, there's a couple of different things that you can do with it. The first being, you can obviously, you know, leave it as a steak. You can cut this up for kebabs. If you're doing a big batch of grinds, you can do it into grinds. I'm not gonna show you how to cube it because we wanna keep it in steaks today. So I'm gonna show you, just take off the backside. Get a nice sirloin steak there. So in the sirloin, get these moved out of the way a little bit. With the sirloin, you have a few different looking cuts. Now, if you buy one in the store, most times you're gonna have one that has the cap still on it. Like if you go to Publix, Winn-Dixie, Buy Low, Save More, any of those, you're usually gonna have the cap running on the top of it. Now that cap is this, and I'm gonna show you in a minute, like I said, why we took this off. So we're just looking at, you know, and again, this is for our own house. So we want as little waste as possible. I am gonna grind the rest of this and make some burger. I'm gonna mix it with some chuck meat. We're gonna do that a little bit later. But right there, that's a perfectly fine steak. I'm gonna trim off any nubs that just kind of hang out. So there's our first one. Now you can see, and you'll see it get bigger and bigger as we go through, but there is just this little bit of silver skin that runs straight down through here. Now that will cook out. A lot of folks, they'll cut this little piece out. This little piece of meat right here is very, very, very tender. And you can take it out ahead of time, but the steaks you're gonna get off of it are gonna look more like steak tips. So I like to leave it in with the sirloin steaks themselves. And again, we're just going through and trimming up whatever we can. We don't want to make it look too bare, but you do want to have just some nice clean looking steaks. Another thing you're going to notice as we get farther down through here is this line right here. So this line will eventually turn into gristle, and you'll see that right here on this first one that we cut off to face it. So that's all gristle right there. So we're gonna cut this out. We're gonna make this a beautiful fillet, and then this piece is gonna go into grinds, but we'll get to that in just a sec. So we're just gonna continue going down, making sure that everything looks good. And here we have the first really noticeable piece of gristle. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna just chop that out. Another tip when you're buying sirloin fillets at the supermarket is you want to look for ones that don't have any offensive lines going through them. The reason being is those lines, the bigger they get, the harder they are to cook through. So you can see like this one here, we're not cooking through that. There's no chance. Even this one here, all of this right in here, while it's not going to be a huge detriment, you can leave that on there if you want to. I just don't like to have to eat around it or chew through it. And this is the perfect size steak for my wife anyway. We're just gonna do the same with this one. Now this one is the end, so we're gonna clean this up just a little bit more than we would of the others. Still a perfectly good steak for the house. Now you wouldn't want to put this, you know, in a tray and try to sell it. But for what we're doing, again, perfect size steak for the wife. So the rest of this, you could grind all of it, but we are going to do kebabs later. So I'm going to just cut some kebab pieces out of it. Again, any of the little darker pieces that were down at the bottom of the steaks, that's the most tender. So I'm gonna be careful not to trim too much off of this because I do wanna get as much as I can out of it. But I don't want any of the gristle because the kebabs aren't gonna cook for that long. Nice big old chunks in here. The fat's something you're gonna wanna save as well. I don't know why there aren't 1,000 videos out there on how to make beef butter. But beef tallow is some of the best cooking oil that you can find. It's also packed with flavor. So if you're doing something like a stew, you can even use the tallow to fry off the beef beforehand. And just pack it full of flavor, especially if you don't have like a stock on hand or something like that, that'll add a little bit of beefiness to it for you. We're gonna roll with that. And then our little end piece right here. So what we're gonna do is just try to get as much of this off as possible because you want the fat clean when you melt down the tallow. And again, we're just going through, seeing what pieces we can use for kebabs. All right, now let's do our cap. So these caps can be a little bit tricky. One thing you want to remember, 9 times out of 10 when you buy a whole one of these, you're gonna have 2 sides that look like they should be cut. This side, obviously, you're not gonna start there because it goes down. You're gonna start with the fattier side, the thicker side. So there's one that has the face open, and then the other one that's gonna be hidden by gristle and fat. So if we were cutting this like a traditional piece of meat, you would want to cut this way. But because this is a picanha, these are actually better cooked. When you cut them with the grain, you cook them, and then when you cut them to eat them, you're cutting against the grain, so it ends up like a tenderloin. Another really cool thing about these is there's 2 or 3 different tenderness levels just from the steak on the end here to the steak on the end over here. So this we are going to clean up pretty well. just on the start there. And this is something that you're gonna wanna take this out, even if you left the rest of it and just cut it after you cut your steaks out, you still wanna take this little bit of silver skin off here. It's just hard to trim after you've already cut it into steaks. So we're gonna just get through some of this right here, and then we're gonna start getting this gristle out. So the way that I like to do it is, again, with just a really sharp knife, come through and just cut under that silver skin. Get your knife under there. And then once you get it started, I like to poke a little hole so I can hold it. You're gonna wanna hold your knife up. And if you cut through the gristle, no big deal. We're just trying to take as much as we can each time. And you can see you end up with nice little clean pieces of it. And again, this silver skin, you're not gonna cook through this. We're gonna angle up and come out. Now this piece, you can just whack it off. Just be careful you don't go down to the meat there. You can always trim more off, but you can't put any back on. All right. So we are ready to cut steaks. A lot of folks too, they'll flip this over and they'll try to cut all of this stuff off. I'll show you why that's a bad idea here in just a second. Much easier to know where you're cutting and how to cut after you've already cut them into steaks. So again, we're gonna go with the grain on this. This first steak, I usually like to keep this little tail on. You'll see a lot of folks that'll cut that off. They'll square this side off first. What you're really trying to do is make sure that you're cutting with the grain again on this. Try to get you a good picture of it. So the grain on this, and you're looking at this muscle, not the muscle we cut the sinew off of. So this muscle, you can see the grain is running just like this. So we're gonna cut directly perpendicular. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna go down and you're gonna find the last point in which you'd want to have this little piece on there, and then we're just gonna cut that off. And that's a perfect size kebab piece. So then we're just gonna cut with the grain. And I like nice thick steaks. These hold up really well in the pan or grilling, and you can see, cut with the grain. Everything tells you not to do that until you get to this cut of meat. Just getting some nice thick steaks out of here. Now this end piece, I'm gonna cut for kebab chunks. You can leave this as a steak. And to do that, kind of show you. And again, it's not gonna be the prettiest steak, but we also paid $6.99 a pound versus $10.49 a pound. And I'm not presenting this to anyone. I'm not gonna put this in a tray. I'm not gonna try to sell this. But I'll tell you, this is gonna taste the same as all of this and all of this. So it's all meat in the end, and use it for what you want to. Personally, I'm gonna use this for kebabs. So I'm gonna go ahead and trim the rest of the fat off. Just get under here. Give me a nice little starting point. and cut it into kebab chunks. Now these steaks, this is why I said to leave this until the end, because when you're cutting like this, you know, in the grand scheme of things, you're looking at this and you start cutting and you're like, okay, I'm gonna go all the way down to, you know, this section here. Well, you try to do that same thing on a steak like this and you're running directly into the meat. You don't wanna do that. You want to leave fat on this cut. And again, I don't want to take off too much, but I also don't want too much fat in the pan. Now, if you weren't making like a beef butter, you could leave the majority of this fat on there, just clean off the top. And what I mean by that is you can see the difference between the color of this fat versus the color of this fat. You just want to clean this up. You can literally scrape it if your knife is sharp enough and you want to. But basically you just want to get all that dirty, I call it dirty fat, off the top. And then when you put it in the pan, the first thing you're going to do is lay it down in a hot pan just like that. Let it sear off the fat, render some of the fat, you know, and then go about it that way. But we're making beef butter, so all this fat is going to get used in some way, shape, or form. We're also going to make, like I said, a mix between sirloin and chuck burgers. When we're done with them, they should come out to about 85%, give or take. But we're also going to throw just a tad bit of top round in it as well. There you have it. Flip her over. Give her a check on the other side. At this point, we're just making this look pretty. Same thing with these ones. Perfect. So 4 good sized steaks out of that. And then we still got our top sirloins over here. So the fat, I'm going to show you how I prep that to boil it down. So you can just bunch it up like a giant piece of Play-Doh and then just run a real sharp knife through it, kind of like you're cutting an onion or a zucchini or something like that. You just want to make sure that you get them as small as possible, but you don't have to go crazy. Another thing you can do is you can run this through just like a KitchenAid grinder, something similar. But if you are doing that, keep in mind you're going to want to make sure that there's no sinew going into it. It will kind of clog up those grinders just a little bit. If you process wild game, you likely have a nicer grinder. If that's the case, a lot of that stuff you can leave on. Anything with some pretty sturdy metal blades is going to work out just fine for grinding up the fat and the sinew and all that.
processing that? What is sinew?
Sinew is like a connective tissue. So what it does is it basically connects the fat to the meat, and you can see that like when you go to eat a piece of these, this steak, you're gonna notice that there's like a line between the fat and the meat that's a little bit chewy. And what that does is, again, it connects the fat to the meat, but it also is hard to chew through, even if you cook it. So, even if you cook it for an extended period of time, it's still not gonna cook down as much as one would like. Especially, being that they're steaks, you're gonna obviously feel that bite. But without the fat, those steaks are just a little bland. So you really do need the extra flavor that they give off to have that cap on there. So I always leave it on. Now, when you're talking about a grinder, some of the KitchenAid or Cuisinart grinders, they'll have these, little tiny itty bitty blades about that big. When you're talking about a piece of sinew that we chopped off that maybe runs, this length of fat, for instance, and is about this long, when it gets in there, it's gonna tangle. If you have something a little bit sturdier, something with, a larger metal blade, any counter grinder or anything like that would obviously work. But again, it's just those KitchenAids and Cuisinarts that you might run into a little bit of trouble. And so again, we're just cleaning up the fat. I am gonna use this. Nothing's gonna go to waste here. What fat I get out, we're gonna melt down. And any of the little tiny cuts, like the little bit that I'm gonna get out of here, is gonna go straight into grinds. So as I'm doing this, I'm noticing that the steaks are getting a little warm. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pause on the fat, because the fat's gonna get cooked right now anyway. We're gonna start packaging up some of this meat. So we've got our little grind pile right here. We're gonna keep that handy. Move this bad boy out of the way just a little bit. Grab our little food saver. Okay, and you can use any kind of bags you want. You do want to make sure that they are freezer bags. Whether or not you're putting them in the freezer is completely moot. You just want to make sure that they're going to get the tightest seal possible. So, just going to run through here. So another thing you want to look out for when you're putting them in the bags, even if you're just storing it in the fridge, is you do not want to have meat on meat. If you have meat touching meat, so the red touching the red, you're gonna end up with gray lines. Now that's not gonna mean that the steaks are bad, it's just gonna mean that they're not gonna look, just like this when you go to take them out. You wanna make sure they're all the way down in the bottom of the bag, make sure that there is at least some connecting areas where that's gonna suck all the air out. And then we'll show you this one. So basically what happened is this corner back here didn't seal, so we're just gonna redo these. So one of the reasons that we are redoing this is down at the bottom here you had an air pocket. Now if you end up with an air pocket, that is horrible. Any kind of oxygen getting to the meat is going to eventually turn it a really bright red and give it almost a crusty texture. So you want to make sure that these are packed in there well, especially if they're going in the freezer or if you're going to refrigerate them for a few days before you grill them. You just want to make sure that everything looks good, because you can only do this once before you put it in the fridge and you're done. So you gotta make sure you get it in there right the first time, or the second time, or the third time, or however many times it takes you. There we go. Got a good one on that. No air bubbles, no air pockets. All right, and then these are going in the fridge. Now the larger steaks, you're gonna wanna do one at a time. And then these little fillets, you can package them up together. Now I am only gonna put one in each bag. My wife eats one at a time, one of these little small steaks. So that is perfect for me to be able to pull out a large one and a small one and not have to worry about cutting a bag open and then resealing a bunch of other steaks. I can just pull this out of the freezer when I'm ready for it, let it thaw out, and I'm good to go. So we're gonna speed this up a little bit. I'm gonna go through the rest of these, and we'll see you back here in just a minute. So another thing you'll notice is you see how the meat starts to turn a little bit. It's a little bit darker in some spots, bright red in others. What we're gonna do is we're gonna leave this sitting out for just a minute, and it's gonna come right back. So if you leave it touching each other too long, that's kind of what I meant by when it's sitting in the bag, it does the same thing. But when you leave it sitting out too long, sometimes it'll turn a little gray if they're touching. Now, if they do turn a little gray before you vac seal them, just let them get some oxygen. They'll turn a nice bright red again. And so you can see this one's kind of coming back to life a little bit. You can see it's starting to turn a lighter red. I don't want to leave it out too much longer. So we're going to go ahead and vac seal it now. I don't care what it looks like because we're going to eat most of these later today. So we're gonna get back to breaking down the fat. And we will see you back here when I'm finished up with the fat, and we'll show you how to boil that down in the next video. So you can see here, a lot of this fat is nice and cleaned up. There's just a little bit of pieces of meat here and there somewheres. But we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna get this all melted down into beef butter. And we're gonna do that in the next video, so stick around. But that's all we have for you today. Appreciate you coming out, and we'll see you next time. Here we've got just the regular top sirloin steaks. We've got our cap steaks. We've got some smaller fillets. One more big boy there. And then we've got some kebab meat. And here we've got our grinds. This is a steak, we went through the trouble of cutting all this. We might as well cook one. And then this is all the fat over here. And again, at another time, I'm gonna show you how to melt all of this down and make beef butter with it.